The Fall of Rome by Aidan and Benjamin Webster. Rome's long decline began with a crisis in the 3rd century. The crisis in the 3rd century began a constitutional change that would culminate with Diocletian and Theodosius. Diocletian divided the empire into multiple emperors, and Theodosius made this constitutional change permanent with the division of the empire at his death between his two sons. Now, the division was accompanied by a new administrative change. The civil administration of the Roman Empire and its military were changed to deal with the ongoing circumstances. Dioceses replaced provinces as the basic unit of administration and would be a key tenet and bit of this new imperial order. The next major change in the Roman Empire's civil administration was the creation of the Praetorian Prefects. This once military title had become a civil title. Praetorian Prefects were charged with prefectorates. These prefectorates were the largest civil administrative divisions in the Roman Empire. They were basically emperor in all but name in some circumstances when the emperor was weak. This was a significant devolution of power to the civil administration and would have serious consequences for the emperors. Another major change that came about as a result of the crisis in the 3rd century and Diocletian's reforms was the strengthened imperial bureaucracy. The empire's bureaucracy had to be strengthened to deal with numerous threats, and in order to create a more absolute monarch that Diocletian wanted. To do this, he created new titles. The first of these is the Magister Officiorum. This was the master of officers, or the imperial chancellor. What he would do was he would basically control the imperial bureaucracy. And the next title was the Magister Militum, or master of the soldiers. He was in control of the whole military of the empire. He reported only to the emperor, and was a very powerful figure. A few key examples of this are Aetius and Stilicho. Stilicho and Aetius were both barbarians who assumed the title Magister Militum of the Western Roman Empire, and in that role they served as emperor in all but name. With this increased bureaucracy came an important social change. The crisis in the 3rd century was also marked by a plague. This plague devastated the Roman population and economy. The emperors, in order to deal with this, created serfdom. Coloni, which were free farmers or landholders, the basis of the whole Roman economy, were made into serfs. Every person had one profession that was inherited from their father, and they would follow their father into that profession. This was to deal with all sorts of social crises plaguing the empire, but as the beginning of the feudal institution of serfdom. The last major bureaucratic reform instituted by later emperors was done by Theodosius. Theodosius revoked the Edict of Milan, which had granted all the Christians religious freedom. By revoking the edict, he revoked religious freedom and would go on to destroy pagan temples and make Christianity the true and only religion in the empire. While doing this, Theodosius made the Christian church into a tool for the emperors. The emperor became the vicegerent of God on earth and controlled the Pope and the patriarchs of the different parts of the Catholic or Christian administration at this time. The Christian administration became a propaganda tool and an important part of the imperial bureaucratic machine, ensuring loyalty and providing a stalwart bastion of support for certain emperors. It was also during this period of time that the building of churches became an important part of imperial policy. The emperors stopped building roads, aqueducts, baths, and other parts of earlier Roman public administration, and began to only build basilicas, which were churches. In fact, a lot of the early Christian churches and very beautiful churches were built during the 400s by emperors in an effort to gain a pious notion or in an effort to increase their support among the church. And other projects or public works projects were forgotten about. This was a key change to the empire. The next major change to the Roman Empire was its military. The soldiers of the Roman Empire changed drastically. The empire focused mostly on the defense rather than on offensive military actions, and as such, the empire's military was reorganized. The empire's military was divided into two basic segments, the comitatenses and the liminentii. These two segments would form a big part of the empire's ongoing defense system. The liminentii were used to defend against minor incursions. They were the border guards. The comitatenses were the field armies. These were the professional soldiers of old, still widely equipped as heavy infantry, but with a new focus on cavalry and archers. The Roman Empire had begun to adopt the tactics of its foes. They used shields and armor and weapons styled after barbarian weapons, and the comitatenses were armed and trained very much akin to the barbarians. This was how the Roman Empire was able to defeat them, but it came at the cost of its military individuality. Another new segment of the Roman military machine was mercenaries. Generals and other important people in the empire would now be using mercenaries. These bucelari were, in effect, retainers. They were hired by generals, politicians, and other people to serve as bodyguards in their own personal field armies. This was a massive change. Now, Rome no longer had a monopoly on military power. Military power could be held by anyone, because all they had to do was just hire retainers. This created a massive problem. Now civil wars were deadly. They could be sparked by politicians with their own mercenary regiments, or they could be sparked by generals in the field with field armies. This would create instability. Roman military equipment at this time also began to change. The pilum, which was the javelin of old, was replaced by the plumbato, a heavier javelin that was dangerous to armor. Heavy cavalry, equipped in the Sassanid style, which meant that they were cataphracts, were now the norm. These heavy cavalrymen became the dominant piece of equipment and were highly required. Horse archers, modeled after Hunnic horse archers or Sarmatian horse archers, were a key component of any Roman field army. Light cavalry from the Germans was another big portion of it, and cavalry in general had an increased range and reliance. Heavy infantry, which had once been equipped with the coria sacramenta, which was basically plate armor, now was only equipped with chainmail, and a small oval shield compared to the large scutum of old. These changes in equipment reduced the Roman army's infantry's effectiveness, and reduced its effectiveness overall. And another change that had come about with the Roman military's new reforms was foederati, or treaty troops. In doing this, what the Romans did was they allowed barbarian tribes to settle in the empire and repopulate devastated regions. Either they had been devastated through the plagues that had happened in the 3rd century, or through war or famine or anything else. But in doing so, they compromised the borders of the empire and allowed for barbarians to actually settle in Roman land. And these barbarians provided the majority of the military recruits and military forces for Roman armies, beginning the Roman descent into being controlled by the barbarians. And during this period of time, barbarian tribes would increasingly invade the Roman Empire, causing massive crises as there was no troops. There wasn't enough troops. Rome couldn't fight on all these fronts. It just didn't have the manpower or the resources anymore. These new reforms had been designed to counter it, but they had failed. The Romans tried to deal with their failures by creating massive border defenses. These were called limes, or limes. Limes were important in the fact that what they would do was they would provide a stationary border, or a fortified border. This made it difficult for the barbarians to actually invade the empire and do anything. In doing so, it made it easier for the Romans to hold their borders, but it also made it so the Roman field army wasn't actually effective in battle. The Roman military became one of just sitting around in a fort rather than pushing outwards. They had to rely on barbarian troops and allied troops for that. This was part of the military deterioration of the empire, and even though its borders could be held by an effective military force, increasingly it wasn't. And this was part of the reason for Rome's fall. The Romans, because of this, were now being invaded by all sorts of barbarian tribes. The Germanic tribes, armed now in a very Roman fashion because of the Romans' adoption of their military tactics, began to settle in the empire as treaty troops, and it played an increasing role of asserting an influence in the empire. These tribes, the Franks, the Alamans, the Lombards, the Goths to an extent, all would play a key role in compromising the empire's borders. The Visigoths would invade Iberia and settle down there. The Goths would invade Illyria and settle there. The Franks would invade Gaul and settle there, compromising the economic security of the empire and making it increasingly difficult for the emperor to exert authority. And as the emperor lost resources and authority, the empire was unable to maintain itself, leading to this perpetual collapse, as its borders were compromised and its economic certainty, or its economic safety, was destroyed by repeated barbarian invasions and looting. In fact, one of the more famous examples of this was the sack of Rome by Alaric. The other major enemy of the Roman Empire was the revitalized Persian Empire. The Persians, under the leadership of the new Sassanid dynasty, had replaced the decadent Parthians, and in doing this, had revitalized themselves. This new, resurgent power in the east would begin to invade Rome's eastern frontier. The eastern part of the Roman Empire was key economically, both of its trade with China and other areas, and in the riches that it held. With the Persians invading and constantly requiring the best Roman soldiers on that frontier because they were the best organized, the best equipped, they had the best troops, best everything really, they were a proper match for the Romans, Rome was unable to fully concentrate on the barbarians, leaving it virtually defenseless at times to barbarian threats. The Sassanids, in fact, played a key role in tying up Roman resources and making sure that the western half of the Romans would eventually fall. The last major enemy of the Romans was the Huns. The Hunnic tribes created the Great Migration period, actually. Their push outwards from the east into the west forced other barbarian tribes to move forward, causing a drive for them to actually settle in the Roman Empire, beginning Rome's crisis with its boundaries. But the Huns' eventual coming in completely ended it. The Huns destroyed Roman military forces, they forced the empire to pay massive amounts of tribute, and they repeatedly ransacked imperial provinces and decimated them, destroying the economic ability of the Roman Empire. And when the Hunnic Empire finally collapsed, other nomadic peoples were following in their wake, beginning a great period of migrations as new peoples constantly arrived and invaded the region. After the Huns, there would be the Slavs, the Lombards, other people. And Rome would never recover. The Huns dealt them a mortal blow, and the barbarian invasions combined with all these new reforms designed to counteract it, but in the end proving useless as the economy of the Romans collapsed. The political borders were gone, the military inept. Rome finally fell. Here's a good list of recommended websites if you wish to read up on the later half of the Roman Empire and learn more about the many reforms instituted during that time. Here's a list of some of the facts mentioned in this video on the fall of the Roman Empire and the later Roman Empire's reforms to its military and civil administration, what happened during that period of time, and other such things. And lastly, here's a set of questions that you should be able to answer after this video. That is all. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.